Simple Show presents PCB Specs. This is David. David is a buyer for an electronics manufacturer. To get quotes for a new PCB, David, in theory, needs to enter his specifications manually in his supplier's online inquiry forms. He finds this process too laborious, though, and so instead, he simply sends his specifications and all production-relevant questions by email. This is Marcus. He works in the CAM department of a PCB manufacturer, and it is him who receives David's inquiry data. Since David hasn't used the online inquiry form, Marcus now has to transfer all the information into his company's system manually, and this is something which he has to do for several orders per day. He's used to it, but it's still cumbersome, and some data does get entered incorrectly. Once Marcus has slogged his way through the format of David's specifications, he notices that there are some errors. Marcus has to contact David several times before he can provide him with a good, error-free quote. This all takes them both a great deal of time and effort. Marcus is overworked, and David is annoyed because he has to wait so long for his quote. And then there's Jim. Jim works in sales for an assembly manufacturer. He also sometimes gets inquiries from David. To get the right PCB for the assembly, David also sends Jim his specifications. Often, though, Jim doesn't know the technical requirements of the PCB, and therefore forwards the specifications directly to his PCB manufacturer, Marcus. Jim sends any questions and problems Marcus has directly to David. The way in which Marcus receives David's answers to his questions and problems is just as long-winded, and therefore this also takes a lot of time. A solution which is quick, reliable, and prevents the occurrence of unnecessary errors is therefore needed. And that's where PCBspecs comes in. With PCBspecs, David can enter his specifications in the system, which immediately checks whether the data he has entered is correct and whether he has forgotten anything. David simply sends Jim and Marcus and all his other suppliers a link, and they in turn simply download David's specifications from PCBspecs. Marcus can now carry out costings much quicker, since all he needs to do is press a button to import the specifications into his costing system via an interface. And Jim can be confident that all of the data is complete and correct. And if David subsequently decides he wants to make any changes, he can do so no problem at all, thanks to PCBspecs. With just one click of the mouse, both Marcus and Jim receive David's updated specifications. And what's really great is they can also immediately see in the logbook what has changed. Now, everyone's happy. David, because he no longer receives unnecessary queries from Marcus and Jim, and therefore gets his quotes quickly. Marcus, because he always receives data in the same standardized format and thereby can concentrate on his actual work. And Jim, because he knows that he won't unwittingly pass on any incorrect information. With PCBspecs, David, Marcus, and Jim not only save time, but also, more importantly, money.